Imagine a shadow that fills the room before the person even enters, a presence so vast that it bends the perception of those around it. A figure whose very existence unsettles the confident, forces the powerful to hesitate, and reminds the oppressed that strength, courage, and dignity cannot be fully contained. This is not a story of myth or legend alone. It is the story of human resilience, of a spirit that refuses to be diminished, and of a life that challenges everything we think we know about fear, power, and freedom. The phenomenon of physical presence as a source of power and psychological influence has been a recurring theme throughout human history. In societies structured around strict hierarchies and systems of domination, particularly those rooted in enslavement or oppression, physicality became a double-edged sword. Individuals born with extraordinary size or strength often lived in a world that both fetishized and feared their bodies. A towering stature did not only command attention in a room, but carried with it an aura that could redefine the dynamics of authority and submission. Imagine walking into a space where someone looms above everyone else, their presence alone reshaping the energy of the room, drawing the eyes of all, forcing the mind to acknowledge their existence even before any words are spoken. This impact is not merely superficial, it is deeply psychological. Physical presence, particularly when amplified to extremes, creates a tension in those around the individual. People unconsciously recalibrate their behavior in the presence of such formidable figures, often revealing insecurities, vulnerabilities, or latent fears that have little to do with reason and much to do with instinct. In the context of enslavement, where power was brutally codified and often wielded without restraint, the presence of someone physically intimidating challenged the very assumptions that underpinned the oppressive system. Height and muscularity are more than just metrics. They are embodiments of potential energy, a promise of capability that can shift perceptions before any action is taken. For the oppressors, the sight of someone who could easily overpower them introduces a cognitive dissonance. Their authority is theoretically absolute, sanctioned by laws, custom, and social norms. Yet here is a human whose very being hints at the fragility of that authority. This awareness, an almost primal fear, does not require the individual to act aggressively. It exists in anticipation, in the nervous glances, the slight hesitation, the recalculated movements of those who wield power. In historical accounts of enslaved individuals of extraordinary size, masters and overseers often experienced a quiet, simmering anxiety, a recognition that the conventional tools of control, chains, whips, threats, might not suffice if confronted directly. The presence of someone who could defy physical subjugation posed a subtle but profound threat to their perceived invincibility, introducing a variable that could not be easily measured or contained. This interplay of fear and power highlights a crucial aspect of human psychology. We are often more intimidated by potential than by action, more unsettled by what could happen than by what is certain. Beyond fear, the physical stature of such individuals inspired a complex mixture of awe and curiosity. Communities living under oppression often internalized narratives of resilience, hope, and strength through observing these figures. A person whose very size suggested defiance became a living symbol of what the human body could endure and achieve, even in the face of relentless brutality. The psychological impact on fellow enslaved individuals was significant. Seeing someone who could not be easily intimidated or controlled fostered a sense of possibility. It reminded them, often silently, that strength and human dignity could persist even under circumstances designed to erase them. The individual's presence alone could disrupt the monotony of oppression, introducing moments of silent resistance where their body, rather than explicit rebellion, communicated a challenge to the status quo. This effect demonstrates the nuanced ways in which physical presence transcends brute force. It becomes a tool almost symbolic in nature, a silent assertion that power is not always dictated by law, custom, or social expectation. In this sense, physicality operates on multiple planes. It is simultaneously practical, symbolic, and psychological, influencing the oppressors and inspiring the oppressed. In addition to psychological influence, physical presence can alter behavior in immediate, tangible ways. Masters who might normally have issued commands without hesitation could find themselves second-guessing their actions when faced with someone of extraordinary size. Instructions that would have been enforced through intimidation alone became less certain, creating an unspoken negotiation of power. Even if no physical confrontation occurred, the looming threat of potential resistance could lead to more cautious behavior, subtle compliance, or strategic avoidance. In extreme cases, it forced oppressors to rely on reinforcements, surveillance, or punitive measures disproportionate to ordinary circumstances, highlighting the destabilizing potential of physicality in systems built on unilateral control. Here, fear functions not just as emotion, but as a mechanism that shapes social dynamics, influencing decision-making, hierarchy, and the distribution of authority. The historical significance of this interplay extends beyond the individual case and touches on broader questions of human nature and societal organization. It illuminates how physical differences, often incidental and outside the individual's control, can influence the course of events in oppressive contexts. The awe inspired by such presence reflects a primal human response, rooted in evolution, where size and strength signal survival capability. The fear experienced by oppressors is equally revealing, exposing the fragility of authority when confronted with variables that cannot be fully controlled. This dynamic suggests that domination, no matter how meticulously structured, is never absolute. It is constantly negotiated through perception, instinct, and human variation. Finally, the narrative of someone whose physical presence commands fear is inseparable from the broader cultural imagination. Tales, anecdotes, and legends emerge precisely because these individuals embody extremes. They challenge assumptions about power and vulnerability, create space for moral reflection, and inspire enduring fascination. The focus is not merely on spectacle, but on the profound implications of presence, agency, and resistance. Physical stature, in this context, is a form of silent rebellion, a reminder that human beings cannot be entirely reduced to tools of oppression, that even in systems designed to dominate, unpredictability persists, and that fear, respect, and awe are interwoven threads in the tapestry of human interaction. The paradox of power and vulnerability is a concept that resonates deeply in the context of individuals born into systems of oppression, particularly slavery, where physical strength or imposing presence could coexist with profound limitations on freedom and agency. It is a contradiction that highlights the complexity of human existence. Someone might possess attributes that suggest invincibility, yet still remain at the mercy of societal structures designed to control and subjugate. In these historical contexts, physical might or intimidating stature could create an illusion of dominance or even superiority. Yet this potential power existed in a world where laws, custom, and brute force constantly reminded them of their subordinate status. The paradox lies in the collision between innate potential, the natural strength, size, or talent that could inspire awe and fear, and the externally imposed restrictions that render even the strongest individuals vulnerable. It is a profound tension, illustrating that strength is not always equivalent to freedom, and that the human spirit, no matter how formidable, can still be constrained by circumstances beyond its control. Individuals with extraordinary physical attributes often became central figures within their communities and even among oppressors, not because of formal authority, but because of the aura of power they projected. Their presence suggested the possibility of defiance and autonomy, creating a sense of admiration, hope, and caution simultaneously. Yet, despite this perception of power, these individuals remained legally and socially powerless, subjected to rules that could be enforced with violence and fear. This paradox was not abstract. It was tangible in daily life. A single moment of perceived resistance, a gesture of independence, or even the suggestion of defiance could trigger extreme punitive measures. The juxtaposition of immense potential with constant vulnerability demanded extraordinary psychological resilience. These individuals had to navigate a world where any assertion of strength could provoke deadly consequences, where the very characteristics that made them extraordinary could also make them targets. Their lives became a constant negotiation between expressing their innate power and surviving the structures that sought to suppress it. The tension between power and vulnerability also illuminates a deeper truth about human systems of oppression. Physical strength and size are visible, measurable, and undeniable. They command attention and, in many cases, respect. Yet the social constructs of domination, legal codes, economic systems, and cultural norms operate independently of physical attributes. These structures are designed to strip away agency, rendering physical might secondary to institutionalized control. In essence, power in the natural, corporeal sense is insufficient when confronted with organized, systemic force. This creates a profound existential tension for the individual, one in which every decision must weigh personal capacity against systemic limitations. The paradox is deeply instructive. It shows that human strength, while awe-inspiring, is not the sole determinant of autonomy or security, and that true power often requires more than physicality. It requires strategy, resilience, and understanding of social dynamics. Psychologically, this paradox shaped the behavior, perceptions, and strategies of those involved. Individuals who possessed formidable physical traits often had to cultivate emotional intelligence, situational awareness, and subtlety in their interactions. Strength alone could intimidate, but survival depended on knowing when to exercise restraint, when to assert presence, and when to yield to circumstance. This interplay between capacity and constraint required an acute understanding of human nature. Recognizing fear, predicting reactions, and leveraging presence without overstepping boundaries that could provoke fatal repercussions. The paradox of power and vulnerability, therefore, extended beyond physicality into the realm of strategy, social intelligence, and moral decision-making. It emphasized that power is not simply about what the body can do, but also about how presence, perception, and action interact with the forces that seek to limit freedom. At the same time, the paradox serves as a lens to examine the moral complexities of oppression itself. The very systems that impose vulnerability on strong individuals reveal the fragility of authority when challenged, even subtly. The fear generated by exceptional presence exposes the cracks in structures that claim absolute control. This paradox challenges the narrative of total dominance often associated with historical oppressors, showing that control was always conditional, subject to human variation, perception, and resistance. It underscores that oppression, no matter how systematic, is never complete. Even within rigid hierarchies, the presence of extraordinary individuals introduces uncertainty, complexity, and potential for disruption. The paradox becomes not just a feature of individual experience, but a reflection on the limitations and vulnerabilities of oppressive systems themselves. Moreover, the paradox of power and vulnerability contributes to a richer understanding of historical narratives. Stories about individuals with extraordinary physical traits often focus on spectacle, on the apparent invincibility suggested by size or strength. Yet the deeper reality is that these individuals navigated an environment where every action carried risk, where every assertion of power was shadowed by potential retaliation. By acknowledging this paradox, historians and storytellers can move beyond mere fascination with the physical and explore the nuanced human experience, the courage, the strategic thinking, the constant awareness of danger, and the moral and psychological strength required to survive under such conditions. It humanizes the narrative, transforming it from legend into a complex portrait of resilience and agency in the face of systemic constraint. Finally, the paradox speaks to universal human themes. In many ways, it reflects the broader tension between potential and limitation, between capacity and circumstance, experienced not only in historical oppression, but in everyday life across societies. Strength without freedom, talent without opportunity, intelligence without recognition, all echo the same fundamental tension. By examining this paradox in the context of historical oppression, we gain insight into both the resilience of the human spirit and the structural forces that shape human experience. It is a lesson in humility, empathy, and understanding, that even the most formidable among us can be constrained by circumstance, and that true freedom is as much about context, justice, and recognition as it is about innate ability. Psychological warfare has existed wherever power, control, and human domination intersect, and within systems of enslavement, it was one of the most pervasive, insidious, and effective tools used to maintain authority. Beyond physical restraints such as chains, whips, and forced labor, the true strength of oppression often lay in the manipulation of the mind, in the subtle yet profound ways individuals were conditioned to fear, obey, and internalize their own subjugation. Within this context, even a single person whose presence or reputation could instill fear represented a profound disruption to the carefully calibrated dynamics of control. The concept of psychological warfare in these systems is not merely about coercion. It is about the delicate balance of intimidation, perception, and social engineering, where fear could be weaponized to enforce compliance, maintain hierarchy, and suppress potential resistance before it could manifest physically. The mere awareness that someone was capable of extraordinary acts or possessed an imposing physical presence could act as a silent challenge to authority, revealing the limitations and vulnerabilities of the system itself. One of the primary mechanisms of psychological warfare in enslavement systems was the cultivation of fear as a constant, omnipresent force. Enslaved individuals were acutely aware that the consequences of defiance could range from brutal punishment to death. This fear was amplified by the unpredictability of the oppressor's actions, creating a pervasive sense of tension and anxiety. In this environment, individuals who stood out due to exceptional physical attributes, intelligence, or reputation disrupted the expected hierarchy. Their presence alone, whether through silent observation, a mere glare, or the possibility of resistance, became a psychological variable that could unsettle even the most confident oppressors. This disruption did not require active rebellion. It relied on the latent potential of strength and the human instinct to anticipate threat. Psychological warfare in this context was as much about what could happen as what did happen, leveraging fear of the unknown, fear of loss of control, and fear of unpredictability. The influence of psychological factors in systems of oppression extends beyond the oppressed to those wielding power. Masters and overseers often relied on absolute authority, but even in these roles, the presence of individuals who defied conventional control introduced doubt, hesitation, and anxiety. The uncertainty about how to handle someone whose presence suggested potential resistance created internal conflict within the oppressors. They had to weigh the risks of confrontation against the social and economic consequences of allowing perceived autonomy. This tension illustrates the fragility of authority when challenged by human variation, showing that dominance is never absolute and is continuously negotiated through perception, reaction, and psychological assessment. In many historical accounts, moments of hesitation or avoidance on the part of oppressors occurred not because they lacked tools of control, but because the fear and respect elicited by an individual's presence created uncertainty about the outcomes of confrontation. Psychological warfare, in this sense, operates in both directions. It empowers the oppressed in subtle ways while exposing the vulnerabilities of those in power. Reputation played a critical role in amplifying psychological influence. Stories, rumors, and word-of-mouth narratives about a person's strength, courage, or defiance could travel quickly, creating an aura that preceded them. This reputation functioned as a form of psychological leverage, altering the behavior of others before any interaction occurred. Oppressors might act more cautiously, assigning additional enforcers or avoiding direct engagement altogether. Fellow enslaved individuals, meanwhile, might find hope and inspiration in these narratives, interpreting them as proof that resistance, even if constrained, was possible. The psychological impact of reputation extended beyond immediate fear. It shaped social dynamics, alliances, and strategies within the enslaved community and the larger environment of oppression. In this way, psychological warfare was both defensive and offensive. It protected individuals indirectly through perception while challenging the stability of oppressive hierarchies. Another critical aspect of psychological warfare in enslavement systems is the constant tension between potential action and inaction. The oppressor's fear was not based solely on physical threat, but on the unpredictability of behavior, the anticipation that the individual could act in ways that disrupted order. This dynamic created a continuous mental strain on both sides. The oppressed had to calculate their actions carefully, weighing the consequences of resistance against the necessity of survival, while the oppressors had to continuously assess risk and control measures. The mental energy expended in these interactions underscores the significance of psychological influence as a form of power that operates without physical confrontation. The mind becomes both battlefield and tool, and the presence of an extraordinary individual can tilt the balance subtly but profoundly, affecting strategy, behavior, and even the broader structure of authority. The effectiveness of psychological warfare in these contexts also highlights the resilience and ingenuity required of those who endured oppression. Survival depended on understanding not only one's own capabilities, but also the fears, expectations, and limitations of those in power. Individuals who could inspire caution, hesitation, or respect without overt confrontation were practicing a form of psychological mastery. They leveraged perception as a shield, influence as a weapon, and presence as a tool of negotiation. In essence, their understanding of human psychology became as critical as physical strength, illustrating that power is multidimensional and cannot be measured solely by visible attributes or formal authority. Finally, examining psychological warfare in historical enslavement systems offers broader insights into human behavior, power, and resilience. It shows how fear and perception can shape social structures, how authority is contingent on compliance and perception, and how even within systems designed for total domination, unpredictability and human variation create openings for subtle forms of resistance. The paradoxical interplay between fear and power, between visibility and vulnerability, and between potential and constraint highlights the complexity of human agency. In these historical contexts, psychological influence was as significant as physical reality, demonstrating that the mind, reputation, and perception are critical arenas of struggle in any system of oppression. Recognizing this allows for a more nuanced understanding of history, one that appreciates both the brutality of control and the quiet ingenuity of those who navigated it, using psychological insight as a tool for survival, resilience, and silent defiance. Resistance in the context of systemic oppression takes many forms, ranging from subtle, almost imperceptible acts to bold, overt defiance, and it is this spectrum that reveals the profound human drive for autonomy and dignity. In societies built upon enslavement, where every aspect of life was controlled and freedom was systematically denied, the acts of resistance by individuals were not merely gestures of rebellion, but essential assertions of humanity. The concept of resistance is often misunderstood as requiring dramatic, conspicuous actions. Yet in these historical contexts, the mere act of maintaining one's identity, making personal choices, or asserting bodily autonomy was in itself an act of defiance. Those individuals who possessed extraordinary physical attributes, intellectual acuity, or reputational strength could leverage these traits to enhance their resistance. Yet the essence of rebellion lay in persistence, courage, and strategic engagement rather than sheer force. Each small act, whether refusing to comply immediately, asserting control over a minor decision, or silently challenging an order, was a deliberate negotiation of power and a declaration that oppression, no matter how thorough, could never fully erase human agency. The scale of resistance varied widely, reflecting both individual capacity and environmental constraints. For some, resistance was overt. Acts that openly challenged authority, threatened to disrupt the established hierarchy, or demonstrated an unwillingness to submit entirely. These actions carried tremendous risk, as they could provoke violent retaliation, social ostracism, or even death. Yet their impact was equally significant, not only asserting the individual's agency, but also inspiring hope among peers and creating ripple effects that challenge the assumptions of those in power. Historical accounts reveal that even one decisive, courageous act could recalibrate the dynamics within an oppressive system, forcing masters and overseers to reconsider their strategies and underscoring the fragility of what appeared to be absolute control. Resistance in these moments was a calculated gamble, a risk-laden assertion of selfhood that transformed personal strength into a form of social and psychological influence. Equally important, resistance took subtle forms, almost invisible in the broader historical record, yet profoundly impactful. These acts often involved tactical compliance, performing duties in ways that subverted the intentions of oppressors, manipulating perception, or using intelligence and ingenuity to assert control within constrained circumstances. For example, an individual might pretend to follow an order while maintaining internal autonomy or create opportunities to exercise choice in situations designed to eliminate it entirely. Subtle defiance could take the form of language, gestures, or minute decisions that retained a sense of identity and dignity. These smaller acts, though easily overlooked by contemporary observers or historians, were essential forms of resistance because they preserved humanity in the face of relentless dehumanization. They demonstrate that rebellion is not solely measured by spectacle, but by the persistence of autonomy under extreme constraint. The interplay between physical strength and acts of resistance is particularly compelling. Individuals who possessed extraordinary physical attributes were often more visible and, consequently, their actions carried amplified weight. Even simple refusals or gestures could be interpreted as threats, compelling oppressors to act with caution. Physical presence could deter immediate punishment or create space for negotiation, and when coupled with strategic intelligence, it became a formidable tool of subtle rebellion. This form of resistance highlights the multidimensionality of power. It is not confined to physical ability alone, but intertwined with psychological insight, reputation, and situational awareness. The capacity to resist in a meaningful way, therefore, depended on a sophisticated understanding of both one's own strengths and the vulnerabilities of the system, demonstrating that resistance is as much about intellect and perception as it is about physicality or courage. Resistance also functioned as a source of communal inspiration. In environments designed to suppress individuality and solidarity, acts of defiance, big or small, served as symbolic reminders of possibility. Witnessing a person assert their autonomy, whether through overt confrontation or subtle subversion, reinforced the notion that oppression could be challenged, if carefully, and that personal dignity was not entirely extinguished. This communal impact is crucial to understanding the historical significance of resistance. It was rarely isolated in effect, influencing social dynamics, morale, and collective strategies for survival. In essence, resistance operated on multiple levels: individual, interpersonal, and communal, shaping both immediate circumstances and long-term cultural memory. Moreover, the strategic nature of resistance in these contexts illustrates the profound human capacity for adaptability. Each act required careful consideration of risk, timing, and potential consequences. The individual had to anticipate responses, gauge the psychology of oppressors, and balance the need for survival with the desire to assert autonomy. These decisions demanded resilience, foresight, and moral courage, reflecting the intricate dance between constraint and opportunity that defines life under oppression. Resistance, therefore, is inseparable from agency. It is the conscious exertion of influence within a world designed to remove control. The act of defiance becomes a moral and existential statement, asserting that, even in the most restrictive circumstances, the human spirit retains the capacity for choice, judgment, and courage. Resistance also highlights the paradoxes of oppression. Systems designed to dominate completely often inadvertently create spaces for defiance. The very restrictions imposed to control individuals, such as rigid hierarchies, forced labor, and surveillance, require enforcement, observation, and human interpretation, which can be subtly manipulated by those being oppressed. By understanding these dynamics, individuals were able to identify openings, exploit weaknesses, and navigate the tension between visibility and autonomy. Resistance, therefore, is not simply rebellion against physical coercion, but an exercise in strategy, negotiation, and understanding of human behavior. It underscores the idea that power is relational, and that even within apparently absolute systems, influence can be exercised in ways that challenge authority and preserve humanity. Finally, acts of resistance, whether large or small, reveal the enduring strength of human dignity. They demonstrate that no matter how extreme the oppression, there is an inherent drive to assert identity, retain autonomy, and influence the world, even in constrained ways. These acts are a testament to the creativity, courage, and moral resolve of those who endured unimaginable conditions, showing that rebellion does not always need to be loud or dramatic to be profound. Resistance is both a personal and a collective force, shaping history through the interplay of choice, presence, and courage, and reminding us that the human spirit persists even in the darkest circumstances. Throughout history, stories of extraordinary individuals, particularly those who lived under extreme oppression, have often been distorted, exaggerated, or mythologized. These narratives, while compelling, risk transforming real human beings into symbols or caricatures, stripping away the complexity, emotions, and daily experiences that define genuine humanity. The humanizing narrative seeks to counter this tendency, emphasizing that behind every legend of exceptional strength, towering presence, or courageous defiance lies an individual with thoughts, fears, hopes, relationships, and struggles. By shifting focus from sensationalized aspects to lived experience, the narrative restores dignity and depth, enabling a fuller understanding of the person beyond their physical or legendary traits. This approach is critical, particularly in the context of enslavement, where the historical record often reduces people to statistics, labels, or stereotypes. Humanizing these figures challenges us to see them not merely as symbols of resistance or curiosity, but as fully realized individuals navigating extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The process of humanization begins with acknowledging vulnerability alongside strength. Extraordinary physical attributes, intelligence, or notoriety do not erase the reality of human emotion and susceptibility. Fear, grief, joy, hope, and love are universal experiences, and individuals of exceptional stature or ability experience them fully, often magnified by the conditions of their environment. For example, someone towering in size and capable of inspiring awe or fear would still endure the daily hardships imposed by slavery, including overwork, inadequate sustenance, and the constant threat of violence. Recognizing these human experiences prevents the narrative from collapsing into myth. It reminds us that courage and defiance exist within a context of vulnerability. This duality, immense presence combined with exposure to systemic oppression, makes their experiences more relatable and their achievements more meaningful. They were not invincible figures, but human beings whose extraordinary qualities amplified both the opportunities for impact and the dangers they faced. The humanizing narrative also emphasizes moral and psychological complexity. Historical accounts often simplify individuals into archetypes: the hero, the monster, the brute, or the symbol of resistance. Yet real life is rarely so straightforward. People who inspired fear or respect often possessed intelligence, emotional depth, strategic insight, and moral reasoning. Their actions were informed not just by instinct or physicality, but by nuanced understanding of social dynamics, consequences, and ethics. For instance, strategic displays of strength or defiance could be intended not merely to intimidate oppressors, but to protect themselves, their communities, or their personal dignity. Their choices reflected a continuous negotiation between survival, influence, and moral responsibility. By exploring these dimensions, the narrative moves beyond spectacle and acknowledges the individual as a thinking, feeling human, capable of complex reasoning and ethical deliberation. Humanization also involves contextualizing extraordinary individuals within their communities and social networks. Exceptional physical or intellectual traits are rarely experienced in isolation. They interact with family, peers, leaders, and oppressors, shaping relationships and social influence. Recognizing these connections highlights that the individual's life and impact were part of a broader social ecosystem. They may have inspired others through mentorship, example, or subtle acts of defiance, creating ripples that extended far beyond themselves. Equally, they may have experienced interpersonal struggles, jealousy, or isolation due to their uniqueness. Understanding these relational dynamics provides insight into the broader cultural and historical context, showing that extraordinary figures were integrated into complex social worlds rather than existing as myths or solitary legends. Another essential aspect of humanizing narrative is acknowledging the mundane and everyday aspects of life. While tales often focus on moments of dramatic resistance, confrontation, or supernatural strength, the majority of existence involved ordinary experiences: work, rest, family interactions, and the small choices that constitute daily survival. These aspects are crucial because they demonstrate the endurance of humanity even under oppression. By emphasizing daily life alongside legendary feats, the narrative balances the extraordinary with the ordinary, revealing a holistic picture of the individual's existence. It reminds us that heroism is not only measured in dramatic acts, but in the persistence of routine humanity under extraordinary conditions. Furthermore, humanization challenges the tendency to fetishize or sensationalize physical attributes. Exceptional height, strength, or skill can easily overshadow the individual's personal qualities, creating a distorted perception of their identity. By emphasizing personality, thought, emotion, and agency, we recognize that these traits were only part of a larger, multi-dimensional person. Physicality contributed to influence and perception, but did not define the totality of experience. Understanding this distinction is vital for ethical storytelling. It honors the individual's full humanity rather than reducing them to a spectacle. This approach also mitigates the risk of perpetuating myths that obscure the realities of oppression, survival, and resistance. The humanizing narrative has broader implications for how we understand history and social justice. By acknowledging the depth and complexity of extraordinary individuals, we resist the simplification and erasure that often accompany oppressive systems. We are reminded that history is composed not merely of symbolic figures, but of real people navigating constraints, making choices, and influencing events in meaningful ways. This approach fosters empathy, critical reflection, and a deeper appreciation of resilience and courage. It also encourages us to consider the structural forces that shape human experience and to recognize the interplay between individual agency and systemic oppression. Finally, humanization affirms the enduring relevance of these historical figures. Their lives, when presented in full humanity, inspire reflection on moral courage, strategic intelligence, and the resilience of the human spirit. They serve as reminders that extraordinary circumstances do not diminish individuality, that extraordinary traits do not erase human complexity, and that even in conditions of extreme oppression, human beings retain the capacity for thought, feeling, and moral agency. The humanizing narrative ensures that their legacy is not confined to myth or legend, but grounded in the reality of lived experience, preserving dignity, authenticity, and historical truth. Legacy and inspiration are central to understanding the historical and cultural significance of extraordinary individuals, particularly those who lived under conditions of severe oppression. Their lives and actions reverberate across time, influencing not only contemporaries but also generations that follow. Legacy is not simply about being remembered. It is about the enduring impact of one's presence, decisions, and resilience, and how these elements shape collective memory, cultural narratives, and moral consciousness. In the context of individuals who exhibited extraordinary physical or moral strength under enslavement, legacy operates on multiple levels. It informs how communities perceive courage, it challenges systems of oppression, and it provides a blueprint for resilience in the face of adversity. Inspiration, on the other hand, is the living, dynamic effect of legacy, which transforms historical memory into a source of guidance, motivation, and moral reflection. Understanding this dual concept allows us to see that extraordinary lives are never confined to their immediate circumstances. Their influence can extend far beyond their temporal and spatial limitations. The first dimension of legacy lies in its capacity to preserve moral and psychological lessons for posterity. Individuals who defied fear, resisted oppression, and maintained their dignity in the face of overwhelming adversity embody principles that transcend their immediate context. Their stories communicate the enduring value of courage, integrity, and strategic intelligence, teaching lessons about the nature of power, resilience, and ethical conduct. These lessons are not abstract. They are grounded in lived experience. By examining how these individuals navigated systems designed to suppress them, future generations can glean insights into human behavior, the dynamics of authority, and the interplay between strength and vulnerability. The legacy becomes a form of moral education, providing examples of how personal agency and courage can manifest even in environments designed to eliminate them. Another critical aspect of legacy is its role in shaping collective memory and identity. Communities that have historically experienced oppression often look to figures of extraordinary resilience as symbols of hope, resistance, and cultural pride. These individuals become embodiments of collective strength, representing the possibility of overcoming adversity and asserting dignity against systemic forces. Their lives offer a narrative that counters the dehumanizing effects of oppression, providing a counterpoint to histories dominated by violence, control, and subjugation. By emphasizing their achievements, strategies, and humanity, the legacy reinforces community identity and continuity, inspiring individuals to see themselves as inheritors of resilience and moral courage. This process demonstrates that legacy is not merely personal but profoundly social, affecting how entire groups understand themselves and their potential. Inspiration, closely linked to legacy, functions as both emotional and cognitive motivation. Observing or learning about individuals who maintained integrity, strength, and strategic awareness in oppressive circumstances provides a template for action and reflection. Inspiration is not confined to replicating specific acts. It involves internalizing principles of courage, resistance, and dignity, applying them in diverse contexts, and sustaining hope in the face of difficulty. For contemporary audiences, these stories illuminate the ways in which human agency can persist under constraint, showing that resistance and moral clarity are possible even in environments that appear overwhelmingly oppressive. In this sense, inspiration transforms history into lived guidance, demonstrating the practical relevance of legacy for both personal and collective empowerment. The tangible and symbolic dimensions of legacy intersect in compelling ways. Physical presence, extraordinary strength, or acts of defiance often capture immediate attention and become the focal points of narratives. Yet the true enduring impact lies in the ethical, strategic, and moral lessons that accompany these qualities. Legacy integrates both the visible and invisible, the awe-inspiring feats that attract notice, and the subtle, ethical, and psychological contributions that shape understanding and behavior over time. This duality ensures that legacy is multifaceted, encompassing not only the spectacle of extraordinary attributes, but also the deeper significance of resilience, intelligence, and moral agency. In the case of individuals who lived under enslavement, this means recognizing that their influence extends beyond immediate fear or admiration, providing enduring lessons in courage, strategic thought, and the maintenance of human dignity. The preservation and transmission of legacy are also significant. Oral histories, stories passed through families, cultural narratives, and eventually historical scholarship ensure that the impact of extraordinary lives continues to resonate. These narratives are shaped by both memory and interpretation, highlighting not only the achievements of individuals, but also the values they embody. In this process, legacy becomes a cultural tool, shaping collective perceptions of what constitutes courage, resilience, and moral action. Importantly, the transmission of these stories often carries subtle lessons about strategy, ethical behavior, and psychological understanding, providing a rich resource for those seeking guidance, motivation, or a model for navigating adversity. Moreover, legacy challenges systems of oppression by undermining narratives of absolute dominance. The lives of individuals who resisted, inspired fear, or maintained dignity reveal that control is never absolute and that human potential can persist despite systemic attempts at suppression. Their stories disrupt historical narratives that seek to minimize agency, demonstrating that even under extreme constraint, human beings can assert influence, inspire respect, and shape outcomes. This aspect of legacy is deeply subversive. It not only inspires future generations, but also reframes historical understanding, emphasizing resilience, intelligence, and moral courage over domination and dehumanization. Finally, legacy and inspiration emphasize the continuity of human values across time and space. The courage, strategic acumen, and ethical resolve displayed by extraordinary individuals transcend their immediate historical moment, resonating with anyone facing adversity. Their lives provide a lens through which to examine contemporary challenges, encouraging reflection on principles such as integrity, resistance, and the assertion of dignity. Inspiration derived from these legacies fosters a sense of connection across generations, reminding us that human resilience and moral courage are not confined to specific contexts, but are enduring qualities that can guide thought, behavior, and social change. By examining the legacies of these remarkable figures, we are invited to reflect on the potential for human agency, the importance of ethical action, and the enduring power of courage, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The story we have traced is not merely about size, strength, or intimidation. It is about the enduring human spirit that persists even in the darkest of circumstances. It is about the paradox of power and vulnerability, the subtle wars waged in the mind, the acts of defiance that ripple across communities, and the humanity behind the myths that so often overshadow lived experience. It is about the legacies we inherit and the inspiration they offer, teaching us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the persistence of integrity, agency, and dignity in the face of oppression. And though the individual may not be named today, their shadow continues to teach us that true power lies not just in physical might, but in the indomitable human will that even the cruelest systems cannot extinguish.